Thank you for joining us. My name is Jane Hauser, and I am the Director of Marketing and Outreach for NESCA. And I am joined by Tabitha Monahan, our transition specialist and counselor. And she will be walking us through the transition basics today, which is the first installment of the Educator Professional Development Series this fall. So just to let you know, we have the Q&A on and we have the chat on as well. And towards the end of the presentation and throughout, I believe, Tabitha will be offering up some discussion points that we will be looking into and trying to get some feedback from everyone. So feel free to chime in there. And with that, I will turn it over to Tabitha.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Jane said, I am Tabitha Monahan, and I am one of the transition specialists here at NESCA. I have worked in the adult human services for most of my career before beginning to work with transition-aged youth, and I'm also a certified rehabilitation counselor. For those of you who may not be familiar with NESCA, NESCA is a neuropsychology and educational services for children and adolescents. And yes, that's a mouthful, so we go by NESCA, offering a range of different services and consultations for families and schools in the greater New England area. And so today we're going to start our fall professional development series talking about transition basics and kind of just starting to get the firm understanding. For many of us, a lot of this will be a review. And so here's our goals and agenda for today. We're going to do a refresher on what transition services are and talk a little bit about what a transition assessment is and is not. In Massachusetts, I believe everybody here is likely from Massachusetts, but in Massachusetts, we have a form called the Transition Planning Form, or TPF. I'm also going to talk about Indicator 13, and of course, throughout there will be discussion opportunities and a question and answer at the end. But if you have questions, please feel free to put it in the chat or Q&A at any point, and we will do our best to answer all the questions. So as a refresher, I know that you are all familiar with IDEA 2004 and free and appropriate public education. But since I'm a big fan of review and repetition of learned behavior, I want to read you the first line of Title 34, Subpart A. The purpose of this Part A to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them free, appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So just again, rephrasing, special education is about having faith that prepares students for further education, employment, and independent living after they leave the public education system. So special education and transition services all kind of fall into that piece. And so in IDEA 2004, it is required that no later than age 14 in Massachusetts, a student's IEP must include appropriate, measurable post-secondary goals based on age-appropriate transition assessment, and of course, how that's related to training, education, employment, and where appropriate, independent living skills. And so transition services encompasses all of these services, including course of study, to help the transition age youth meet those goals. And I think an important reminder here is that it's education and employment. It's not an either or. So, it's not somebody is on a college track or they're on an employment track. We need to be sure we're incorporating their goals for any training and education needs they want and have, and employment. And so the first question and discussion that I wanted to bring up is, when should independent living skills be incorporated into an IEP? It's the federal law is incredibly vague. And so what does when appropriate mean for you and for your school district? And Jane, I am not able to see the chat. So if you could help me out with that, I would greatly appreciate it.
You bet. So anybody who is participating, if you want to chime in either through the Q&A, the chat, we are happy to read your feedback there and use it as a discussion point.
And other things that I think while people are typing and thinking about it, that I frequently think of when I'm evaluating this part is, are there specific skills that we need to make sure every student has when we're talking about independent living or interdependent living? Are there specific ages where this does and does not apply? Are there specific disability categories or populations? The other thing that I was curious about, if anybody's willing to share, is, does your district have a specific way they already decide to include or evaluate the need for life skills?
A quiet bunch today.
Well, it's the end of the day, and I don't know about everybody else, but I know the start of the year for a lot of educators has been incredibly challenging. So I can certainly understand that piece. So while we're waiting for other people to come up with their answers, I'll give you my thoughts. Everybody needs independent living skills, so I'm not exactly sure the where appropriate makes sense. I know it's in the federal law, but thinking about an individual's needs when we're thinking about post-secondary goals and finding that optimum level of independence for a person, we all need independent living skills. So some sort of evaluation of adaptive functioning or determining areas of need, right? So thinking about super common goals that I see in a lot of IEPs are the executive functioning goals, right? So are the students able to generalize academic executive functioning to daily living executive functioning, making a plan to get out of the door? If a student isn't able to access employment or the community because they don't have basic independent living skills, we are not, again, personal opinion here, we are not doing our job in preparing them to be adults that are able to contribute to society and participate in our society. So Jane, I just wanted to give one more chance before I moved on.
We're just warming up.
All right, totally understandable. This, of course, will be more enjoyable for you if you're not hearing me talk for a solid half hour, 45 minutes. And it will go super quick if it's just me talking. So I guess that could be a benefit. So thinking about transition services and what they are, these are a coordinated results of activity, set of activities, and they need to be a results-oriented process. We need to be improving both academic and functional achievement. And so we're thinking about those post-secondary activities. So education, vocation, employment. So this could be, and when we're thinking integrated employment, right, that's meaning the person where they are. So that could be competitive employment with no supports beyond what's available as an accommodation under the ADA, or it could be supported employment and meeting them where they are. It includes adult services, and in Massachusetts, we are lucky compared to other parts of the country where we do have a significant amount of services, regardless of how hard they are to still access right now because of the ongoing pandemic. And again, that independent living and community participation. Thinking about how we participate in the community and all the aspects that we get to do, whether it is grocery shopping and getting to the pharmacy and all those other, essential, boring, errands that we have to run, including getting to find restaurants that we enjoy and participating in leisure activities. And so when we're building these transition services, we need to be taking account the strengths, preferences, and interests. And so in all of these pieces, right? So that's including the instruction that a student needs, any related services they need, and developing objectives and whatnot in the IEP to help them meet these goals. So by definition, by defining transition services and implementing them in our current IEP is tricky because transition services are so broad and can cover a lot of ground. And so this is a whole lot of words on one slide, and it's overwhelming, I think, for even most professionals to think about. So a little simpler way to kind of coordinate that is this graphic. So when we're thinking 4 words, that's that strength, preferences, interests, and needs. What are our expectations? Student participation. By the time the vast majority of students leave public education, they are legal adults. We need them to be building their involvement in this process as much as possible. Transition assessment, transition planning form, especially in Massachusetts. And again, that measurable post-secondary goals. The areas, we've talked about this quite a bit, post-secondary education, employment, independent living, and community involvement. And the concepts are that they are vision-driven, result-oriented. They need to be coordinated by everybody, and academic and functional, right? When we're starting to think about transition, we're going away from the academic piece and more taking it to a functional level and how we're going to use that. So the first start of all of this is using age-appropriate transition assessment. And there's 3 main goals that we're trying to do with the transition assessment. We're discerning a student's goals, gaining an understanding of their areas of need, and we're measuring their current performance. And so like everything else in the IEP process, transition services needs to begin with an assessment. By nature, transition assessment is different than other types of testing because it is designed to and should be an ongoing process. It's not a one snapshot at time like you may have with academic performance testing. And it includes formal as well as a lot of informal assessment measures, and all of these again need to be age appropriate. And so typically, when we're looking at referral questions, right, for private transition assessments that may be done outside of the standard IEP process, our most common referral questions are discerning a student's post-secondary goals in their own words. What are their goals after they exit public education? Gaining understanding of their baseline when it comes to those needs, strengths, and preferences, and measuring where their skill level is right now. And so as I said, transition assessment is a ongoing process of collecting data on the individual's needs, preferences, and interests as they relate to the demands of current and future working, educational, living, and personal and social environments. And that is, of course, from DCDT, which is for those that aren't familiar, a professional organization for professional organization working with transition-aged youth with disabilities. So here's just a sample of different formal and informal assessment measures. you'll see a lot of things on here that maybe aren't even part of like an assessment process when you see a 3-year reevaluation, right? MCAS scores and SAT and ACT tell us a lot of great information of where the student's current skill level is, as well as, the functional academic tests, right? So they can do all the adding and subtracting and algebra, but are they able to make change? Where are they on their self-determination? And a lot of aspects of self-determination are evidence-based predictors of post-secondary success. So we really do want to pay attention to that. And another thing that you don't see here, but I think is beyond essential, is the guidance counselor curriculum that may already be in an active part of your school. So things like Naviance and Score and other similar softwares already have a lot of the personality pieces and interest inventories built in to help students figure out those next steps. So we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. We need to make sure we're gathering data and gathering all of the data that is already readily available. And so we're going to try another discussion question. And so what ways do you build transition assessment into your curriculum?
And feel free to offer your thoughts on either the Q&A in the chat. I do have a comment from our Facebook Live stream. It's actually from a parent who's joining us, who this is referring to the previous discussion, saying it's possible to identify those needed skills at a very early age based on eating and hygiene habits, and can happen or be detected as early as 3rd grade. So I think in response to your previous question, there's just some parent feedback there, which is I think, one person's experience, but certainly true.
Oh, and thank you, parents and all of those joining us on Facebook Live as well. And so thinking about that, we're going to jump back to that discussion for a moment while everybody thinks of their answers for transition assessment, right? So when we're thinking about hygiene, especially, that is something that can become incredibly tricky as individuals enter those teen years. And it has a large effect on how they are perceived in the community and can affect employment. So I think that is a wonderful example of areas that we need to, if that's an area of a need, we need to identify it as early as possible and provide them the necessary instruction and support, whether that is, occupational therapy support or more of psychoeducation on why hygiene matters, or some sort of social skills, social supports to understand how it may affect their enjoyment in the community, or even working with a vocational counselor to determine the impacts on employment. So Jane, does anybody have any thoughts on how they add transition assessment into their curriculum?
It's just very quiet group this afternoon, so I don't have feedback just yet. I will keep an eye on anybody participating online as well.
Excellent. So when we're thinking about it, several ways that I've found incredibly helpful is a lot of students, especially when they're on the academic track, they may not have the same opportunity in their class day to do a lot of these transition activities outside of maybe that guidance curriculum that I had just discussed. But, there's a lot of great opportunities to use these and build these skills and assess these skills in a learning center. If you're collecting data for your IEP already on how much they're advocating for help and support, how they're using their executive functioning skills. Can you take a part of a learning center block to give them the opportunity to do an interest inventory or to have time to explore a career of interest? Is there, as you're preparing for an IEP, right, using some of the resources available free online to help the student expand on their goal. And of course, huge fan of goal setting in general. So finding something you're working on in the learning center to create that goal and give them the practice of breaking down those steps and having a supported success with you helping them. And Jane, I'm assuming we're still a little quiet here, so I'm gonna keep going. So what should these transition assessments include? So in my perfect ideal world, it should include a transition planning inventory. And when we're thinking about transition planning inventories, in Massachusetts, we really want to make sure we're choosing one that covers all of the areas of the Massachusetts transition framework, right? So these are these topics that I keep bringing up where we're talking about education, employment, independent living, and their community engagement. It should include both the formal measures and those informal measures, surveys, kind of things that I was discussing. We wanted clear measurements of the frequency that something's occurring and also the level of support and the level of dependence or independence they exhibit with each skill. And we want to make sure we're gathering information from all of the sources, right? So most importantly, of course, is gathering information from the student, but we also want to be talking to school professionals and the parents, right? That's where we're thinking about the adaptive living skills. We want to see what they're doing at home. How is it generalizing at home? And one thing that I find incredibly important to do is when we have students that are in inclusive environments, we want to make sure we're getting information both from the primary special education teacher, case manager, liaison, but also a general education teacher. So we can see how things are going both in a more supportive environment and a more inclusive environment. And we want to make sure that we're taking a look at situational assessments and that we're getting the data that's related to the student's post-secondary vision, right? So an example of that is if the student has no desire to go to college, maybe that's not going to be the focus of the information we're trying to obtain from the assessment. Another thing that I find incredibly helpful is when we're thinking about the transition assessment, we should be trying to answer these guiding questions, which is from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and in one of their technical assistance advisories, right? So who is the student? What does the student want? And what is the fit between the student and the requirements that meet the student's needs, right? So when we're thinking about this third question, right, I'm sure we've all had the student who wants to be a professional football player, but maybe has never played football or isn't planning on playing football in high school or in college, or the student who has the huge interest in space and NASA and wants to be an astronaut, but is afraid of small spaces and maybe has some dexterity issues, right? And so that's where we really want to take a look and see, do their current performance and their aptitudes match that vision? And that can give us a lot of information on how we can support that student, either in gaining those skills or gaining their a greater sense of self and understanding of where their strengths are. And so now that we've had the transition assessment refresher, we're going to head on over to the transition planning form. So as you all know, the transition form is mandated in Massachusetts, but it is not part of the IEP, right? So anything that's in the IEP, we are required to provide. The transition planning form is a planning form and it's separated And so for those things that we want to make sure are part of the IEP, we need to transfer them specifically into the IEP. And so this is a great form to document the planning items, right? So one of the things I strongly encourage my families and the school districts I work with is let's put all of the needs and all of the plans there, whether it's for this year or 4 years from now, and especially the who's the partner that's going to help the student with that action item. Is it going to be the parents that are going to support them going to driver's ed? Is it MRC, the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission, that's going to provide some vocational support and pre-employment support outside of school? Let's have the transition planning form be incredibly clear so that when we're going from year to year, we don't have to try to reinvent the wheel and figure out what the student needs next, because we've already used the assessment to determine those things. And so what we see in this screen here is literally the definitions and instructions that are on the transition planning form, right? So the student vision is often the same vision that is in IEP 1, right? So the IEP 1 is the student vision, but it may also include the team vision and the parents' vision, especially if they have some different information in it. But the TPF, it absolutely needs to be the student's vision. And so disability-related needs are all the skills that they need to keep building, right? And so these are the things that we're thinking about where they may need IEP goals or objectives, or they may need a related service provider. My recommendation for this is, even if this is something we're not necessarily covering this particular year, let's again keep it in a disability-related need. A lot of times transition plans are, right, that ongoing process. And so while it may be a disability-related need, they're fresh, they're known their freshman year, they may still be focusing on other more time-sensitive things, like their objectives may be more focused on preparing for their academic classes because they want to graduate high school and that's important for them so they can go to college. And the action plan needs to not just be things that we're going to do, right? Those action steps need to be related to the progress and progression of getting the student closer to their post-secondary vision. And we're going to, I think this may be the last attempt to try a discussion before the Q&A. So I wanted to ask everybody, and this is probably a great one for the parents to jump in on too, if we have any parents on the call. What aspects of the TPF do you find most beneficial to your work in the school system as a related service provider, as an outside agency, or as a parent? All right, well, I'll answer my own question again. I'm fine with that. So when I'm doing consultations with school districts and families, or I'm doing an initial intake for a student I'm providing transition counseling for, privately, I really do like to examine the TPF and see where the IEP team is and what steps they think are most important. I also find it incredibly helpful to make sure we're not repeating services, right? So if the school district is focusing on helping a student learn executive functioning skills and generalizing them to non-academic life, I want to support them in the way they're doing that, but I don't want to also be teaching that if the school has a good handle on it. That's not a great way to engage the student if they're doing the same things with me that they've just learned from you. Similarly, if an agency like MRC maybe is not involved yet, that's a great thing to follow up with with the school and the family to see why, right? Is there a reason for that? Was it not a good fit? Did it not work time-wise? Or they just haven't gotten around to that yet. And that's one of the next steps that needs to be added to the TPF. And so, Jane, before we start talking about what Indicator 13 is, I just wanted to see if anybody else chimed in.
We don't have anything from the Q&A in the chat right now. We'll certainly keep an eye on that and online as well.
Okay, excellent. So Indicator 13 is part of IDEA Part B. And basically the short version is to kind of make sure we're hitting all those important transition pieces. The link you see there is for a great checklist that can be incredibly helpful to help you determine how your school district or you personally are doing with important aspects of making sure transition services are meeting IDEA participation. So thinking about all the different aspects of it is, first and foremost, is there evidence and proof that the student was invited to attend their IEP team meeting? And of course, one of the things that I kind of recommend there is making sure we're doing a lot of parent education on the benefit and importance of the student participating. When a student becomes 14, attending a full meeting is understandably incredibly overwhelming. So we need to meet the student where they are and work towards building their skills, knowledge, and comfort. So ideally, by the time they exit public education, they're running their meeting. Is there evidence that a participating agency, so like DDS, the Department of Developmental Services, or MRC, or the Department of Mental Health, was invited to the IEP team meeting? Of course, with this, we want to make sure that there's consent of the parent or student to invite outside people. And we want to make sure that the IEP includes measurable post-school goals. That transition assessment is that the IEP and everything is based on age-appropriate transition assessment, and that the present level of academic and functional performance references those post-school goals, skills, and the transition assessment, right? So when we're looking at those goals, how is their current performance relating to where the student wants to go when they're done with school? And are the transition services we're providing that student ones that will reasonably enable the student to meet those post-school goals? And included in that, does it include a course of study that will help the student meet those goals? The student wants to go to college and they're in a separate classroom and they're not on a diploma track, right? We need to have a conversation about that course of study or the student and the student's vision and what we as an IEP team can do in that regard. Is there evidence that the student has indicated insurance that they're in agreement with those goals, right? That it's their goals and their plans and not mom and dad's or their favorite teachers. And that the annual IEP goals are related to those post-school goals, right? So that's, again, it's mentioned twice because we want to make sure annually we're updating these things. And it turned out that there was one more discussion question that we're going to try. So a lot of, I know when I worked in a school, I wasn't as familiar with Indicator 13 and what we should be trying to strive for. I just knew the school and the district's policies. So I know I went through those incredibly quickly. But what areas of strength do you identify for yourself or your district when you're thinking about the Indicator 13? And are there areas that you would like to see your district or yourself improve?
So not only are we catching folks at the end of the day, but we're asking them what they can work on themselves. We're
Right?
giving them
That's
homework.
always hard. And, no, we're probably still in that time of year where we're developing our professional goals and our SMART goals for work. Or I think I've seen SMARTY goals recently, which I love for those that may have not seen it. For teachers and for other professionals, right? SMARTY goals, i.e. is inclusive and equitable. And so while an individual personal goal for our students may still remain as SMART goals, I really love the idea that we're moving forward to make sure that our goals are related to making things more inclusive and equitable for everyone. Okay, so we are going to switch things up for a little bit, open it up to what I'm sure is going to be a slew of general questions about transition services and basics. So feel free to put in any question you're thinking of, but either that you've had before or are curious about after this presentation. Parents, definitely feel free to chime in here with questions you have.
I'm not seeing anything here or online. If we want to just give it another minute and see if anybody has any last minute questions or observations. Tabitha, is there anything else that you would like to add in?
Well, now that we're at the end, I have figured out where the Q&A and chat are. And we do have one question, and it is, who is qualified to conduct an assessment? I absolutely love that question, right? So we want it to be somebody who is familiar with transition. And given that a lot of transition assessment is informal and ongoing, I think it's completely fine for a special educator to be completing an assessment. I'm of course very biased that I do believe transition specialists and especially vocational counselors and rehabilitation counselors offer a lot of knowledge and support to the process that special educators understandably have not, may not have had as much experience in taking the transition special endorsement classes through UMass Boston. And if you are interested in transition and haven't done that, I am going to put a plug for that program. It is fabulous. There's a lot of information that special educators are expected to know and keep in their brains. And so I think it's important as professionals that we understand our limits and our own comfort. So if you feel comfortable and confident and making sure you're having an assessment that covers all 4 areas, I definitely think there's a lot that special educators can do as part of the transition assessment process. Additionally, though, if you feel you need more training for that, or you don't feel comfortable with that, reach out to your team chair in your district or if your district's large enough, maybe they have a transition specialist of their own, and get that coordinated support so that we can get the information we need. Any other questions? All right. Well, the final plug I have for today is the second and third part of our fall series. So next one, we're going to talk a lot more about the nitty-gritty of some aspects of transition assessment and how we can connect that to career development and exploration for transition-aged youth. That will be in a few weeks on Tuesday, November 9th at 4 p.m. Jane, I want to confirm that will be available on Facebook Live as well, for those who may need to check it out afterwards. And our third one is going to be on post-secondary options. And I am incredibly excited for this third part because we will be having guest speakers from Job Corps to talk about one of my favorite post-secondary options that are not traditional college environments. So definitely come check that out, see what Job Corps is all about. Hopefully we'll have a lot of time for question and answers and to talk about other options for students who may not want Job Corps and all the other opportunities that are available outside of a 2-year and 4-year college. And for those who may be watching this later, or you've had a chance to absorb and think about it and have come up with some questions, please feel free to reach out at info@nescanewton.com. They will make sure those questions get to me, or definitely give us a phone call and connect with me, and I'd be happy to answer any more questions or thoughts that you have.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining us and taking the time to learn a little bit more about the basics of transition. And Tabitha, thank you for your presentation. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Take care.